Hey there, it's Chris with Acting Creative, and this is a hand-woven experience. And in this video, I'm going to talk about stash busting for weavers. Now, have you heard this phrase, stash busting? I first heard this from my knitting and crocheting friends. And the idea is that it's a project or set of projects that helps you use up little bits and bobs of your inventory, right? Things you don't have assigned to a project already, but you want to use up. That's kind of the idea. Now, I've been giving stash busting a lot of thought lately. And what has occurred to me is that unlike my weaving and crocheting friends, I collect a lot more things than just yarn. Being a weaver, of course, I'm going to have leftover yarn. Of course, that's kind of a given. However, also being a weaver, I'm gonna have leftover fabric because you made that project and you had room for your 6 towels, but there was a little bit left. So you have a little fabric left. These weren't towels, by the way, but you know the idea. You always have a little bit of fabric left. And then lastly, at least for me, I always have thrums left. Do you know this word, thrums? Thrums refers to, let me pull that one so you can see it. Thrums refers to your little bits of yarn that are cut off from a project. They can be the knots tying on the project at the beginning and the end, or you always have that kind of dead zone in the middle of your loom, and there's frequently there are inches of yarn left in the middle there. And maybe you don't collect the thrums, but I have never been able to help myself, and I always collect thrums. Now, I have an entire episode all about thrums and some ideas on how to use them, so we've got that one handled. But I wanted to give a little time and space to the idea of stash busting for our other things that we collect, yarn and fabric. So today's episode will be all about yarn and how to kind of think about using up your little bits from other, when you've collected all this beautiful yarn, what do you do with the little ones that there's not much left? So let's talk about how weavers, well, we have an amazing superpower at our disposal because at the core of it, of course, weavers make fabric. So when we think about doing a stash busting project, we're not gonna bust a little of the stash, we're gonna bust a lot of the stash because fabric is a bigger process, it demands more materials, thus we are going to greatly diminish our stash, which is amazing. In one project, we can do a lot of that. So let's talk about kind of the formats that could look like. For me, for my money, I always think of a table runner or a rug as being really nice projects where you can use up all the little odds and ends that you have. They're lovely because they can be washable, but they don't have to be. They can be a certain size, but they don't have to be. I think in both cases, those formats, there's a lot of leeway. So you can really choose how big of a runner you want to make and not worry about what materials. You just put in all the materials and have a great time exploring color and texture and whatever you have. Awesome. And the easiest way to do that is to pick some kind of a reliable standard yarn that you use for your warp, set up the loom, and then use all your little nubby little ends, put those as the weft. Load it up, play with the color, play with the texture. You can set it up for a pattern, but you don't have to. Plain weave is brilliant for a stash busting project, right? So that's the first option, is kind of to think about putting your stash in the weft of a project. Now, you could also use your stash busting options in the warp. As a matter of fact, in a project I just finished, that's exactly what I did. So here is, you can see, these are my warp yarns. You see my little fringe? That's all the warp in this project that I used for a bolt of fabric. I don't know what it is yet, but I just want to make a bolt of fabric using up my stash because here's what I had. I always have this little bucket of a little, like there's just not much left on some of these. It's all the same fiber, it's all cotton. And before I started that project, the sucker was full. I had all kinds of tiny little bits just left on my tubes. And I thought, I'm gonna use that up. And being a weaver, I know exactly how I wanna do it. So I took one color, stood at the warping board and wound on the length, and when this ran out, I pulled up another color, and I just did that to use up all the little bits that I had in my inventory, which turns out fun because then your project is already fascinating and interesting because the warp is just this like multitude, this little rainbow of colors. And then the weft can also be stash, of course. Well, stash busting material, or it can be something else altogether. So that is up to you. So those are my kind of recommendations for reducing your little leftover bits if you're trying to bust that stash. Now, I mentioned a runner or a rug as being great options for that, but you don't have to. You absolutely could do a stash busting scarf. Here's what to consider. Just make sure that you've thought through, are all the materials that you want to use washable, if you want the scarf to be washable, and ponder what the hand is. Do you have a lot of silk left over? That could make a beautiful scarf. So just give that some thought as you are planning for your stash busting project. If you want to use it for something specific, make sure that everything supports that idea at the end. Now, like I said, this is part 1 of our stash busting for weavers conversation, because we still have to talk about what to do with all of these little bits. So I have some ideas for us there too. So stay tuned. And in the next episode, we'll tackle that one head on. All right, my friends, happy stash busting. Have a good week. Happy weaving.